Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for our 7th live stream. I'm Christine Clausen with the Christine Clausen Gallery. And today we have Heather Close rejoining us for a bit of a part 2 from our inaugural live stream that we did with her and Rick Dukeman back in April. And because I thought, we were just kind of learning the ropes with like the live stream at that point, and also because we have kept Heather Rick's show up, and probably will have them up for the duration of the summer. It just seemed like a good idea to invite Heather back to chat with us today. So welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Cheers. I never
Thanks
got
for
that
having
right. Yeah, and hopefully, those of you who are joining us can also join us for a glass of wine or a cider, as Heather's having, or I don't know, a sparkling water or kombucha. Doesn't matter. It's happy hour, and we're hoping we have lots of you tuning in. Please, send us your questions and comments because we do see them and can respond to them during this hour of our live stream. As many of you know, we're doing these weekly on Fridays at 5. We missed last week due to a bit of a power outage issue in Airdrie, but we will have Carrie Arthur's back to chat with us on July 10th. Next weekend, it looks like Madeline Lamont will be joining us from her cottage in Ontario. Hopefully, she is going to be testing her Wi-Fi situation there and getting back to me. And then, we have a few more kind of lined up after that. So yeah, we've got a good summer kind of packed full of some great live stream artist talks. And I'll just make a note here too, just in case some of you don't know, we are now officially open to the public on Fridays and Saturdays from 11 to 4, and other times by appointment if that's just more comfortable for you. But if you're out and about and you'd love to stop by, we would also love to see you on Friday and Saturday because, of course, we have these beautiful works by Heather Close up on the walls, and you can finally come and see them in person. I'll just introduce Heather a little bit, and then I'll have her kind of talk, and we'll get into our conversation. So Heather Close is an emerging artist based in Calgary. Her works are hopeful and unexpected amalgamations of plants and organisms. These works are a love letter to the resiliency and vulnerability of nature and an exploration of the abundance of an organic life. Heather holds a BFA with distinction from the Alberta College of Art and Design, which is now AU Arts, and has exhibited her work at Illingworth Gallery, Pith Gallery and Studios, Truck Contemporary Art in Calgary, Plus 15 Window, and of course, this is her second show with us here at CKG. So welcome, Heather. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
So I am an artist based in Calgary. I majored in painting when I was at ACAD, and actually my first show that I had with Christine, I was primarily working a lot with sculpture, and so this new series is actually me diving back into painting. So, yeah.
Well, and that's very true too, and I did. Last time we spoke in April, I did not have images of those sculptures kind of loaded to show, but I do. So kind of once we get into the talk, I will bring those up for us to kind of chat a little bit about, because they certainly do relate a lot to this body of work that Heather is doing now. So let's just get right into it. And again, like when we last spoke to you, you had been, still kind of working very diligently in isolation, lockdown, whatever you want to call it. And I know we're going to be showcasing a few of these new pieces, but what else have you been up to? Has it been a really productive time for you?
I've still been working at my regular full-time job, but when I haven't been working, I have been creating quite a bit and kind of experimenting with new things. Spending a lot of time outdoors because that's what inspires me. And
Well, I'm just going to get right into it here and bring up a few of these new pieces to kind of ooh and ah over, because I know I had kind of seen bits of verdant when we were getting your show, but it was still very much in process, progress. Um, and now, of course, we have like cerulean, and I'll bring up the third one here in a second. But let's start with these two because I am kind of really intrigued by how it's not just these kind of interesting plants, but now there are these, and in the case of verdant, there's this little kind of like snake friend showing up, and then in cerulean, is it a snake? But it definitely is some kind of crustacean as well. So tell us a little bit about those kind of additions to your work.
Yeah, so I actually think the first pieces I added creatures to were the one like arthropod had a spider in it.
That's right.
And so that one, like those were kind of some of my first experiments, and then I went away from creatures, and then I kind of came back to them. So these are me going back to them. I think like some of the reason why I started adding snakes was because I really like the patterning in them. And I think also, yeah, and I think also because I'm afraid of them. It was kind of exciting to add this animal in that scares me, but I also find very beautiful. Yeah, so it's kind of a play because I see my works as hopeful, and so it's kind of a play between fear and hope.
Well, it's true. And what better way to like conquer your fear too? Like for those of you who are watching right now, we were having a little bit of talk about this before we went live, and I too am a little bit scared of snakes, but like intrigued, yes, by like the patterning in their bodies, and so I'm actually going to just bring cerulean down so we can kind of see a verdant a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever held a snake?
Yes, I have. Yeah. Yeah, I was okay with it somehow.
Yeah.
But like I think also in these pieces, I don't ever give the snake a head.
Right. No, that's a good point too. Yeah.
So it might make it a little less scary. But also it's like creates this tension in them with like having just like a part of the animal and not a full animal. Like, is it there or is it part of this? Is it part of this being? So it kind of makes them more fantastical and weird.
Well, it's true. And there's no fangs either, right? This way you just see this like lovely, kind of swirling of its body and its tail. But, and I guess and that's one thing we can kind of talk about later, because I'm very curious again about your use of colors and, the tone on tone, right? These greens on greens on greens. But I do also want to bring up, if I can find it here. Here we go. Cerulean as well. So tell us about that. This little crustacean friend.
Yeah, so that one I did right after verdant. I wanted to kind of play with some deeper blues, and I've been kind of adding in, like in some of the pieces that are at the gallery, there's a lot of kind of sea and ocean themes. So there's some urchins and corals that are mixed in. So I was kind of playing more with kind of sea themes. So I don't know. I actually like crabs, and I'm not afraid of crabs. So the crab entered in there, but I did find it kind of this interesting thing to create kind of like a limb that isn't necessarily connected to anything, and you can't. Yeah, it's part of this weird being, and of course the snake showed up again. So the patterning is good. I just got to grab something because my cat's gonna knock it over.
Well, that's okay. Yeah, no, I'm really quite intrigued by, again, going back to this like whole idea of them being tone on tone too, which we hadn't really talked about in our first discussion. So maybe we can kind of talk about that now. I'll bring up the other new one. Well, what else should I bring up? Oh, I'll bring up this one behind me. So this is again like kind of a really beautiful example of this tone on tone. So why are you working that way? Like, is it like, what is it?
I think it's the fun of restricting myself in some way.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it makes me look at the plants and animals that I put in there differently because they're not that color. And so I
Mm.
can kind of play with them. They also kind of make the being kind of more cohesive. So it's pretty interesting to me that way to kind of play with color. And then I think, like, you'll notice that it isn't strictly blue, like greens and yellows end up in them, and pinks. So it's kind of having fun with those tones, and how can I make a mostly blue piece that also brings in some kind of warmth to it. Yeah, I like the challenge of it, and
Yeah.
I also just like playing with all of the tones of one color and seeing how they interact with each other.
Well, and I think you do a beautiful job of it because, there is just something really kind of magical about all these different variations of, well, in these two that we have up on screen, specifically all the blues, but with, like you said, like little hints of yellow or little hints of green, and sometimes there's like a little wash of purple. Which is why it's also a good idea for you, those of you who are watching, to come and see the show in person, because of course these details get a little bit lost when we're looking at them online. They definitely read as being very monochromatic, but there's a lot of colors in there. Okay, I really want to bring in this other new one because it is kind of like it's, again, for those of you who had tuned in for our first live stream, we did talk a little bit about glimpses of the unknown, which I tried to upload, sadly, a few minutes before we started. I thought it was, in my uploaded images. It is not. But it also, interestingly, has these two kind of separate, almost like dueling, opposing forces in it. So tell us a bit about this one, in Yearn.
Yeah. So it was actually kind of inspired by the last live stream. Candace was bringing up questions about kind of the relationships of the two pieces in Glimpses of the Unknown. So like there's two beings that kind of interact, and I realized I kind of wanted to dive more into what that interaction looked like. The other thing that we talked about was kind of how I make my work, because I sit down and I never know what's going to be the next part. And so with this piece, I actually filmed it. I've posted a time lapse on my Instagram if people want to check it out, but it kind of shows how I put these pieces together and where I start and kind of what happens. Like I never know where I'm going to go with it next. And this one is kind of interesting because the green part is primarily plant-based, and then the kind of gray-blue part ended up being more seed-based plant.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
And then there's kind of a touching, and I think that's where the other green comes in. Yeah, and also you asked me what my favorite plant was, and it was string of pearls, and I realized I hadn't picked it yet, so I thought maybe I'd put it into a piece. So this was kind of just playing with all those ideas together.
No, and it is pretty fantastic because that is a pretty cool plant. With the little balls that kind of hang off the delicate stem. But I also kind of like these shapes that are almost like they're not plants. And I don't know, tell us a bit more about the larger green forms, like where you've got all that beautiful, lush, like kind of inky texture, and the gray one as well. And they show up even in cerulean, like below me, there's this like kind of larger blue shape that just has this like mottled texture that you can't stop looking at. So like, how do these play in? Are they, again, like based on like plant matter, or are they more just to kind of break up the space? Or tell us.
They're kind of more free form. They're not based on plants, but they're kind of a starting point. Like I like having this shape to start with and then play with. And I think they kind of make them more of the creature instead of kind of layered plants. So it is kind of this base for all these beings and plants to grow off of. And I just really like it. I find it really exciting to start with the ink because I don't know what's going to happen. And because you put down the water and then I drop ink on it, and I don't know what kind of patterns it's going to create inside or what shape I'm going to end up with. So it's kind of a fun process to start the piece and to start thinking about how these things interact.
So what other creatures may pop up in the future? Like, what else are you looking at beyond the crustaceans and the snakes?
That's mainly what I've been looking at right now. I'm not sure. I think furry animals might not make it in.
Okay.
Who knows? Yeah. I'm not sure where I'm going to go with the as far as the animal route. Um, I kind of do like picking things that are a little bit um, I don't know, weirder or scarier.
No, I
Like,
can see that because, like, mice and they're almost a little too cute, maybe, whereas I do like that there is this kind of element of, kind of surprise, and they're a little unexpected, right? Because, snakes and crustaceans and spiders, or maybe, yeah, not like the friendly kind of creatures to have in paintings. And I guess that's also why I'm drawn to them. I'm just going to say a little, excuse me, a little hi here to Carl and Rob, who have already commented. Thank you for joining us today. But yes, I do like that about them. And I mean, in cerulean, is it a snake or is it some other type of reptile?
it is a
almost,
snake.
okay. It seems a little bit like larger than other snakes, but of course there's lots of other snakes. That's silly of me to say. But anyway, I'm intrigued by this. I'll be curious to see what other kind of snakes pop up.
Well, even in urine, there's some creatures in there that are more hidden, like the two leaves looking things at the bottom are actually bug wings. But I kind of liked how they look like leaves. And then there are fish scales.
If I can get it. Can I get it bigger? Not really. Just trying to play with views. Okay, maybe this is okay. So that's interesting. So yeah, I guess I hadn't even thought it. Well, you just sent me these images 2 days ago, and honestly, I've unfortunately like only seen them as well, like by digital images. So I know all those like kind of little nuances of them really need to be seen in person because of your brushwork, especially too, right? Again, people, you need to come see the show because the brushwork, like, what do you have? Like, does the brush have like what, 3, 5 hairs in it? Like, some of them seem extremely
Some of them are
intricate.
very small. Yeah, they're very small for sure.
Too, right? Like, I love that intricacy and that detail you're getting. And, perhaps this is a good time to also, bring in, I'm going to bring in, this is okay. So I'm bringing up a couple images of Heather's sculpture that were a part of the show that we originally had at the gallery. So these are sculptures, and I know it's hard to get a sense of scale here, but they're like 9 inches by 9 inches by 6 inches. Like, these are tiny little things, like this big. So the amount of detail that she's again packed into them, this time not through brushwork, but through some crazy embroidery and a master work with the balsa wood and constructing these little houses. But why don't you talk a little bit about, I guess, this body of work and then how it moved into the paperwork.
Yeah, so these pieces were kind of mainly about kind of architecture and landscape together, and kind of the natural and man-made world and their interactions. A lot of it was inspired by living in Victoria and seeing all these houses just covered in plants.
Right.
Yeah, and I think what I found that I was more drawn to was the plant life, and I became more excited about the plant life, and so I think that's where I went. And I did do a few sculptures that I haven't shown that are mainly based on plants. And then I somehow fell into wanting to do some, because they're easier to store, paintings. And then I fell in love with working with watercolors and exploring plants in that way. And I think that the way that I paint these pieces is the way that I build the sculptures, and how I add things and kind of play around with things and don't know how it's going to turn out. And how I piece things together. So they are kind of sculptural in the way that I create them.
Right. Well, and there's sculpture on their forms too, because, even, and I'll bring kind of another one up, but, even, they kind of float in space as a sculpture would. I mean, they're flat on the piece of paper, but you are sculpting on paper is what you're doing in essence. Um, so you're right, that's a very good point. I guess I hadn't really thought about that until you just said it. It's like, of course, these are sculptures because they do. Like I said, they float. So kind of whimsically. Here, I'll
Yeah.
bring up another one here. And this is maybe a good segue too into another question I had for you, which is the watercolor and the gouache, like these water-based materials, because they're very unforgiving. I mean, anybody who's kind of worked, excuse me, who's worked in them know, like, unlike oil where you might have days to kind of go and scrape something back and start again, or acrylics where you can do similar things with extenders or paint over, like watercolor is not forgiving. The whole idea is that there is a beautiful transparency to the pigment, but that also means that once it's down on the paper, it's done. There is no going back. So how do you like, why do you love it so much, for one? I guess, like, how do you deal with that? Like, that uncertainty of working with this material, because I think it does take a little bit. It's a bit more technical, I guess, and I shouldn't say that. I'm going to make oil painters and acrylic painters mad. Sorry, but there is, again, that lack of being able to make errors.
Yeah. So I do love it because of the flow and quality and translucency that you can get from it. And you can build areas up or leave them soft, but yeah, it is definitely uncertain and but also playful because I'm not a perfectionist and I kind of really like mistakes and embrace mistakes, and I find more mistakes are beautiful. And so I think that some of the reason why I like working with this is playing with that and seeing how I can kind of embrace those mistakes or include them or keep them in. Because I don't think I've made mistakes, or I wouldn't call them mistakes. I've made decisions that that probably like I could have stopped earlier, like stop painting earlier, but then it ended up teaching me more. And so I find that the fun thing about it is that it's always learning. Like I always get to learn with this material. And like in the past, I've worked with a lot of acrylics, and I found that there was kind of this notion of needing to make things perfect and painting over them and reworking them. And this one, you just have to just stop and embrace the imperfections and the outcomes. So, and they are kind of supposed to be these imperfect, weird objects anyway, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, no, and I do love that about them, that, you kind of can see your intuitive approach to it as well. What I wanted to ask you something else kind of about the water media. Well, we talked about the brushes a bit, the little brushes. Oh, I know what it was. What about, like, how, do you throw some away? Like, are there some that just don't work out that you're just like, nope, I can't pull this back, so they're just done?
Yeah, there have been a lot less than I expected that I
Mhm.
try. And sometimes it's just, yeah, like I just don't feel like it has the feeling that I want it to have. But surprisingly, like like a lot of them have ended up in the show. So like I didn't have quite a lot of mistakes, but I think the fun thing is like I always keep them and sometimes cut them up and work into them again. So
Okay.
they get a new life at some point.
Well, and with your papers, I know we talked about this a little bit in our last live stream as well. Because of course we were talking about our paper show that nobody really got to see, but tell me a bit about the paper, because a lot of it is, of course, there are quite a few that are like the ones behind me where they're, on white paper, but then like arthropod, which is below me, and I'll bring up a few more of these that are on colored paper. Tell me a little bit about the colored paper. Like, there's got to be some challenges with working on colored paper, but there's a lot more texture on these colored papers too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is more texture. And the colored paper, I learned a lot about painting with color and what color you can use and how they interact and how you can kind of work the color into the painting. Because it doesn't all work on colored paper. And I think the reason why is because I actually started this series on colored paper.
Mm-hmm.
One of the first, yes, these are some of the first works. And so I think part of it was because I was experimenting and getting back into painting again and using watercolors, which I didn't normally use. There was something a lot more friendly about a colored sheet of paper than a blank white page.
Okay.
And so it gave me that room to experiment and be a little bit more playful, because it didn't seem as frightening as looking at something and being like, I have to create something on this white page. So I think that's why I kind of dove into the series with colored paper.
Well, it does give them kind of a romantic feel too. Like, just because they aren't as stark, there is, a lot of richness to them. And again, another reason for you all to come and see the show is that these papers have, just a really beautiful texture to them as well. Like they, in the show, we don't have any of these ones framed. We have them just kind of mounted up with some little L pins on the wall. But the paper itself just is, kind of its own sculptural, like relief sculptural entity. Like there's so much tooth on this paper. But you said you didn't make this paper though. Like you bought this paper.
Yeah, I did. Okay. I think eventually maybe I'll get into making my own paper.
Well, that's like a whole other thing. I know. I'm like, we're just piling every time we talk. We're like piling more on you to do. Like,
I'll have created a new piece inspired by this one.
Well, if you don't have anything else going on in summer, you can just set up like a paper making, studio as well in your bathroom. I'm going to bring up this one too, because this one is not in the show just because we didn't have a lot of room for it. But, and I was saying to Heather kind of before we started, the artist talk, that what I like about this one is it almost has the effect of like pressed flowers. Like there is a certain kind of flatness to them that I really like, and this like very angular, this angular composition. So tell us a bit about this one.
Yeah, I think this was me slowly embracing getting away from my sculptures, and so that's why the wood is still very much a part of it, and so it's still doing like the man-made and nature, and I think it was flat because it was, I guess, literally I was taking my sculpture ideas and putting them on paper. So it's kind of this first exploration into how does this translate. So, yeah. And I don't know, I liked the idea of kind of these delicate lines coming off of this wooden piece.
Well, we talked a little bit about this last time, but yeah, so some of these plants, are all of them real, but are some of them embellished?
All of them are from real plants, but yeah, some of them do end up getting a bit embellished, or I get a little bit more creative with them, for sure.
All right, what else can I ask you about? Oh yeah, this is my, back to elementary school question. Do you have a favorite color? I mean, I see a lot of blues turning out, but
it's green.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll bring up this little green friend here. Yeah, I really like this one. Actually, this is a sweetheart. I have also it here. I took it off the wall and I felt bad. So I was like, well, maybe I'll just ensure that I have it handy kind of for a bit of a show and tell. But
that was the first one I did in this series.
Oh, really? Okay.
So maybe the green was a little bit more friendly to me. So I just started with that.
Yeah, it was an old friend.
Yeah.
Well, and I think, and this is, this is a bit of a side note, but you could really, well, the purchaser could really have a lot of fun framing these too, because I think you could put, of course, you could put like a plain black frame on these, but you could also have a lot of fun. In fact, we did sell one that went in a pretty elaborate copper frame, which was kind of cool to see. Like just something very different, a little unexpected as well, right?
Yeah, totally. You can have a lot of fun with them.
What else do I want to ask you about? Well, I guess like, these last couple of months too, while you have been in isolation, um, what have you been kind of listening to and reading? Like what has been also inspiring you in your creative practice?
So I haven't been reading as much as I probably should, but I did recently read The Strange Bird by Jeff Vandermeer, and I previously read his book, Born. And I think they influenced me in what I'm kind of experimenting with, because they're both these weird stories about this ruined town in biotech, and lots of creatures that are kind of made up of many things, like plants and animals all together. Yeah, they're a bit probably darker than what my pieces are, but definitely inspiring. And then, like as far as listening to, I've been listening actually to a lot of music that I used to listen to in high school and college. So I guess I'm just feeling more nostalgia. So we'll see how that works into if it gets into my work somehow. But yeah.
No, I just have to ask because I mean, ever since we had the live stream with Chris, became kind of, and I know he's a music obsessed, but I mean, we all listen to music. So it's made me kind of also curious to hear, to get some ideas, well, for some summer reading and summer listening lists. Oh yeah, one big question I wanted to ask you about was, because you were here like last week to finally see your show. So tell me a bit about, like, what did you think of the show when you finally got to see it up on the walls?
Well, I think it's always exciting to see your work up on the walls, because it feels different being in a space where there's white walls and the lighting is nice. So it was definitely just seemed more real to see them up on the wall, as opposed to just hanging in my poorly lit studio. So yeah, no, it was wonderful, and I loved the way that you hung the show. And it was neat to see some of them in frames, because I mean, I don't see that with my work, because I don't frame them at home. But yeah, no, it was definitely an exciting experience to come see them in person.
Well, and it's just, they are, yeah. I mean, it actually went up very easy, because there seemed to be kind of some themes developing, especially with the ones that were like colored. But I wanted to kind of play with putting, some of the ones on colored paper and then some of the ones on the white paper together as well. One we haven't talked about yet is this beauty, which we did again kind of talk about in that first live stream, because it is a little bit of a unique one in that it's predominantly black and white with the little hits of color. And I know you have to follow Heather on Instagram, because her brother made a really amazing little animation of this piece as well. What is it? What is your handle? HV Close Art, or
it's heatherclose.art on Instagram.
I want to say, because I know I follow both of them, and I'm trying to.
One of them is predominantly like my cats.
Exactly.
The other one is it's a little bit more exciting.
I mean, you have really cute cats too.
Yeah, this piece was really fun actually to watch him animate, because it gave it life for sure. It was kind of neat to see it in that way. But yeah, this one is predominantly colorless. And I think some of it is because I am drawn to really vibrant palettes and really vibrant colors. And I got this gray ink, and I thought, well, why not challenge myself to
always
only
the challenge. Always the challenge. You're like, okay, we're gonna do this.
Yeah,
Another
I
comment.
just learning and growing. So
No, but I think that's amazing. Like, why? Because I've always thought that, I think the most successful artists are the ones that who tend to kind of play more, right? They kind of constantly are, like you are, like pushing yourself in uncomfortable directions, territory you haven't been before. Because if you're just doing the same thing over and over again, like what's the fun in that? Whereas, with this black and white one, I'd like to get it better, but they don't give you a lot of views here to make that one image, you can't select which image you want bigger, I guess is what I'm trying to spit out, so we can see this beauty. But the kind of tulip-like flower at the top is just so luscious. And then that just like little hint of teal in it is pretty gorgeous. And it is one that, oops, wrong way, that we have like a framed in a gallery frame that we had. But just to give people an idea of how they could frame it. So in this case, it's kind of floating a little bit on a white background. But also kind of shows people how you can kind of finish them off, because, the sky's the limit. It could be something really simple like this, or, as we were talking about with the client who bought one, something like bold hammered copper is like pretty amazing too.
yeah, totally. Yeah, and I couldn't resist putting color into this one.
Yeah, you're just like, I gotta get that little bit just in the corner.
Oh, Karen's asking a question. Hey, Karen. It's good to see you here. My next artistic challenges in the near future. What am I dreaming of? I'm actually kind of just in the process of playing some more. I think I'm trying to get a little bit looser, I guess, with my painting and see what happens. I'm not sure what will come out of that. But I'm kind of just in the beginning stages of that. I do, since the start of COVID, I've only had smaller watercolor paper, so like 10 by 14, which is smaller than I would like to be working. So I think what I'm dreaming of is to work quite a bit bigger and see what happens there. So nothing completely sorted out. I'm always experimenting. So.
And how big do you think you take these? I mean, that's a good question too, because I guess I've just seen them at, the largest size in the show is the 20 by 15s. Would you do them larger? Like, would you get some massive sheet of watercolor paper and do some giant, I don't even know what size you could get, but like some enormous, like 36-48.
I definitely have been looking at large rolls of watercolor paper online, and dreaming of doing like a huge piece of what happened. It'll definitely be different because I work so small. Like, I don't know if I would continue to like make a big piece that has a bunch of small elements or just break out my bigger brushes. So
right.
I think it'll be fun to figure out.
Yeah, I think it could be, well, interesting either way, right? Because I think even if it was, you took the 5 hairbrush and you upped it to a 20 hairbrush to get the same effect, or if you continue to use a 5 hairbrush, like it either would be very.
It took forever.
It could, it could be, yeah. But you play a lot with the negative space too, right? So it's not that it would necessarily have to be, wallpaper. Even as we see in, I always think I'm saying this wrong. Scenarius.
Yeah, scenarios. Yeah.
We have some beautiful negative space here. It's you're not filling, you're not filling the paper completely, which I also really like. There's a kind of a really beautiful balance between the drawing and the paper. I'm just going to say hi to Lori. Nice to see you, Lori. And I agree with you. I also love the delicate 19th century botanical cross with fantasy and going on with them. I think it does, kind of just add, a very intimate element to them, which I guess is maybe, again, going kind of like talking about scale. I think the scale has like right now that they are kind of a smaller scale really kind of makes them that way, and they would change incredibly at a larger scale.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be interesting because some of these, like the pieces, some of the flowers are painted a lot bigger than they are, or a lot smaller than they are. So it would
Mhm.
be, but not like hugely so. So
Mhm.
working on larger paper, it would be interesting to see if I made like these larger than life items that don't make sense. So yeah, I do. That is what I want to experiment with next. We'll see. I'll need
I
this
know.
to do it, so I'll work on that.
I know, and you may need some time, so I'm not gonna pressure you, but, keep me posted. I wanna see those in progress shots on Instagram, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What else do I wanna ask you about? Well, I guess, what about, like, beyond, like I know you are working on paper, but have you experimented with I mean, and traditionally, I get that watercolor and gouache are used on paper, but what about, painting on, like, wood panel or something? Like,
Yeah,
what else?
I haven't thought about that, but yeah, I did do a lot of work on wood panels, so it would be
Mhm.
interesting to get back into that because the paint would react differently. So yeah, I mean, it's an option.
I
I
know, like, I need to
always like a challenge.
I know, I'm, like, giving you way too many challenges for your summer, which is hopefully will be a bit more relaxing than that. Um, well, I guess, like, too, like, where else do you see this body of work kind of going? Like, you're still working with, um, is there like, what kind of directions are you gonna open the palette up? Like, we're talked about a size a little bit, but what about the palette? Like, will there be more black and white ones popping up, or will there be more color, or will they be, and I wish I still had that glimpses of the other unknown piece because that was one too that had a lot of different color in it. It was less monochromatic. I apologize, everybody. Again, another reason why you'll have to come and check out the show in person tomorrow, 11 to 4.
Well, I think I'm still having a lot of fun with restricting my palette.
Mhm.
But I have been doing kind of like the most recent ones have been all the restricted palette ones. So it would be kind of neat to go back to color and see what happens now that I've
Mhm.
kind of taken everything back. And then what if I give myself free reign of all color? I don't know what would happen again. But yeah, I think there's still I want more that I want to explore with restricting color. So there will definitely be more of those works. I did enjoy in the new piece yarn having two restricted colors come together. Um, so there might be
Mhm.
more of that, but I never know until I begin.
I know, until that paper is in front of you.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I like just had a just kind of like a brain bubble because I'm like, I was gonna ask you something and now I forgot. Um, Let me bring up, there was one other image, I think. Well, this was one I did want to talk about a little bit too as well. Let me hide this other one so maybe we can get that a little bit bigger. But encounter, um, and is this a part of like there because there are this like time. This has a bit more color, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at than some of the other ones too. It has like the reds and a bit of these kind of yellows and greens. Um, and I do also like that it's a little asymmetrical too. So again, it was this like just a little bit of like a play in the studio. It kind of tells a little bit about this one.
Yeah, this one was yeah, definitely playing a little bit more. I think this was when I started using ink in my pieces and so
Mhm.
slowly being introduced. There's some red ink that ends up in the flower. Um, yeah, and this one has like the main blob was still
Yeah.
color, and so it was before I let kind of ink take over. And then I was, yeah, I've always really liked really great bright palettes. And so I was just kind of bringing in some fun reds and yellows in this one and challenging myself with a flower. So.
Well, and that reminds me actually of, again, now I'm kind of thinking of some of these other questions I wanted to ask you after I had that little brain bubble. But so you work with watercolor, the gouache, and the ink. So and some may only have like two of them and some may have three. So what are the best qualities about each? Like, how are you integrating all three? Like, is it I imagine it has something to do with kind of the brightness, the intensity of the pigments versus the opacity. But it just seems like, three very unique materials to be using in your artwork.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the watercolor and the gouache definitely makes things more delicate, and it's where I take delicate areas. And I've been using ink a lot more because it kind of brings some drama to the piece.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll layer in inks over top of the watercolors, which really kind of liven them up. So yeah, it's kind of a play between this kind of soft muted tones and these really dramatic inks that are, well, wild to control for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this, one of the things I like about the quality of ink is there's colors that are hidden in inks. So as they dry, like even with scenarios, there's some yellow hues that come out of the gray. And so I don't know what's gonna show up, and I can play with that with the watercolor as well. I'm just gonna say hi to my niece Maggie.
Yeah,
Be watching, and has said some very nice things about my art. I love you too, Maggie.
Yeah, that's so sweet. I'm gonna bring these buddies up again to Tentacular and Oddkin, because I also wanted to ask you as well, like, because these do seem, I mean, they're obviously sold individually, but they are kind of companions. And is that
so all the pieces
you often do, or
so these two pieces, the one that was kind of on the green paper that we showed one of, it has a mate as well, and then arthropod and generative and folding, they were actually both painted together.
Okay.
So the way that I used to work on sculptures is I would always work on two at once, because I'd have to be waiting for things to dry.
Okay.
I was kind of working on these. They were actually stretched on the same board and then cut afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So they were side by side, and I was painting on them at the same time. So that's why they're kind of more similar and seem more related, not just because they're on the same color paper. So that's kind of why I was still within my sculpture brain, I guess, like figuring out how I work on these, and then I realized that I could just focus on one at a time.
I know, but there's something, but I kind of like the relationship you get between these two as well. Like, it's certainly, you said a client could pick up just one, but I also kind of feel bad. These two are, they're like best friends.
Yeah.
Like, they kind of are. I mean, we talked about, again, this is another thing I keep saying this. I know folks, like, bear with me. I'm sounding like a broken record, but I just don't know how many of you out there kind of saw our first talk and how many of you don't. So I am referencing back to some of the stuff we talked about, but, certainly there is this idea of them, them kind of being part of some kind of, utopia or dystopia. Like, I don't know what it is, like, right? Because, like, nature is taking over. So do you see them as, I mean, they're presented in very charming and friendly ways, although the crustacean, the snakes are kind of so, like, should we be concerned? Like, is your view that nature is going to eventually kind of take over and rule us all? Is this what Heather Close is telling us? Like, watch out, people.
I don't think it's that, like that. I think it's more like I'm fascinated by the resiliency of nature and how it can kind of take over and regenerate and make ruin beautiful.
Right.
So I kind of see them as something hopeful.
Okay.
Of embracing nature, and I think a lot I mean, even with the snakes and stuff, like bringing in fear, I think a lot of it, like some of it is climate anxiety, and climate grief, and kind of dealing with that, but making pieces that are about hope and about creating kind of this beautiful natural future. It's not necessarily the plants would take over and rule the world, but but that they could, I guess, I don't know, be a symbol of hope.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I mean, certainly I get that. I guess like I was just kind of being a bit of like devil's advocate with that. But certainly you kind of get the sense like they're not it's not like they're violent, but there is something where they are, they're maybe a little aggressive, I guess. Aggressive in like a big hug kind of like a bear hug kind of way, but still there is something about them kind of taking over and looking, like you said, like it is more hopeful for sure. But I mean, besides like growing up in Victoria, like where do you think, or not growing up in Victoria, but like, being inspired by some of those houses in Victoria?
Mm-hmm.
Because this is a bit like kind of sci-fi-ish. Like is this coming from things you're reading, or is it, I mean, we hear a lot of, I guess, about, about, Mother Nature, especially because we had this crazy hailstorm here, like about Mother Nature kind of showing a bit of its wrath too. And I get that sense of them too. Like they're friendly, but they're also kind of a little like, watch out.
Yeah, yeah, I get that. I think some of it is, spent a lot of time in nature, and growing up, we went on lots of walks in the forest, and I've always been kind of looking at plants a little bit closer, and I think I get really interested in some of the weirder things. Like I found there's these leaves that have these weird bumps on them that are created by bugs, but and one of them is definitely destroying the other, but they create this kind of beautiful sculptural thing out of it. And so it's kind of how these plants work together to create something new, or how they exist together.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like there is some tension in it, but they're also kind of cooperating in a way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that. I mean, I get that. Like you said, I just, they are very, they're happy, but yeah, there is like kind of a bit of a darkness to them too. Like not in a evil way, but like just in a, watch out, watch out, humans. Like, these little flowers, especially in your sculpture, right? It's like taking over those houses. I mean, they really are, showing that they can exude force too, right? Like you're saying, it's like this can take the house and it can move it and hold it.
Yeah, like how roots grow out of pavement, and it's
And I see that a lot with these two, right, as well, because of their roots. Like they're very kind of beautiful and sensitive on top, but then you kind of see the roots on these guys. Tentacular and Oddkin. I love that. I love the titles as well. I mean, I know some of them are references, of course, to the colors, but where do some of the other titles come from?
I dislike naming my pieces because I find it extremely difficult. I find it hard. It takes
the club. I think it's all
takes me longer to name them than to make them, probably. Because I find it hard to like kind of sum up a piece, because you're also giving it a feeling when you give it. To be honest, a lot of where these come from are, I talk to my brother a lot about my pieces, and he finds like different articles, and we kind of read different things, and then we find some interesting words or combinations that kind of suit the pieces. So that's kind of where they come from. But
they're just as whimsical as the pieces themselves, and that's what I think is very fitting about the titles. sometimes I have a little bit of a hard time pronouncing, but that they are kind of fantastical, and you're not quite sure, like, are these real words? Are they not? So I guess it's kind of they are kind of perfect in that sense, because you're not sure if these things you're painting are real. Like, they certainly could be, with your beautiful brushwork, but they're fantastical, and the titles are as well. I love it.
Well, and that's why I find it so difficult, is I'm trying to find a name that kind of suits them, that isn't just, that kind of embraces their feeling and their being.
Well, I'm just thankful that they're not like Untitled X I, Untitled X I. Like, thank you, Heather.
Well, as much as I have trouble naming things, I also don't like leaving things untitled.
Bravo. No, I do. Yeah, I do really love that whimsy about them, because they're so playful, and so fun. And anyone who kind of knows you a little bit knows that's a bit of your personality too, right? So, I mean, I'll kind of start wrapping this up now with another plug to please come and see Heather's show, because we've had this beautiful work up since March. And people have been trickling in now that we are in the phase 2 of the reopening. We have had some people come in who've been very, very positive about finally seeing these beauties in person. So don't hesitate to drop in Friday or Saturday from 11 to 4, or if you'd prefer to have a private viewing, we're happy to do that as well. Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, we can make an appointment with you. But come and check this work out. We've got Heather's show up. We've also got the paper work up by Rick Dukeman and Ronald Boakes, who was supposed to be our show after these guys in May. We've got a little selection of work by him, and then the rest of the gallery is filled by some kind of beautiful new jewels by other artists. We're calling it the Redux Show, because we're, let's try this again now that we can. I want to, again, thank you all for joining us for this more in-depth kind of part 2 talk with Heather tonight. Thank you so much, Heather. I think your cat has been also very entertaining in the background there.
I knew that they were going to make an appearance for sure.
I know, they're jealous. They're like, why is she getting all the attention? We half paint them with our, with our feet and paws.
Sometimes we try to sit on them. But yes, thank you for having me again. It was great to talk about the pieces again and show some of my new stuff.
Well, I know, it was just great to have a bit more of an informal chat with you, and see what else you've been up to, because, work doesn't stop just because, the show goes up. A lot of artists are still continuing to work, during this pandemic, or, and as we come out of it, like, the work just continues to flow. So I'll be really curious to kind of check back in with Heather in the coming months, like this fall, to see what else she's got up to. Did she order that large sheet of watercolor paper? But also, just a little note that, again, all these works are for sale at the gallery. You can come in, you can view them online. We're always open at christineclassengallery.com. We have a lovely frame shop, so we can, if you don't want just a plain black frame like these are in, we can hook you up with something far more custom and specialized with Candace in our frame shop. I think that's it. Oh, we also love your feedback. So if you have anything else, you may be watching this live, you may be watching it after the fact, but no matter what, we'd still love to hear your feedback. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out via, our website or any of our social media. And definitely follow, pointing the wrong way, follow this girl on social media, because she's got some really amazing things going on in her studio, and is a really brilliant artist, which is why we've had this second show with her here. Thanks again, Heather. Really happy to talk to you again.
Thank you so much, Christine.
All right, everybody have a great evening, and we'll see you next Friday.